Hello, this is a list of my top 15 favorite films of 2017. Now, I just want to make it clear that these are just my personal favorite films of 2017. I'm not saying all of these are necessarily the best films of 2017. These are just my personal favorites. Number 15 on my list is Get Out. Now, Get Out was written and directed by Jordan Peele of Key and Peele fame. Now, it's somewhat surprising that somebody who comes from sketch comedy not only would do a horror film, but a horror film as effective as this one. Now, there is humor in the film, but the humor never really comes at the expense of the horror. And Get Out was not just, in my opinion, one of the best mainstream horror films of this year, but one of the best mainstream horror films in recent years. And the film has a very powerful social message about racism. Now, Jordan Peele outright admits that the movie is basically a tribute to the works of Ira Levin, like stuff like Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives, but where those movies and books dealt with gender issues, this deals with race issues. Number 14 on my list is Logan, which I would say, at least on a technical level and a storytelling level, is probably the best of the X-Men movies. And it's a great action film, but it's also a really powerful drama film as well. And it's also a really good dystopian film, because the film is set in sort of a dystopic near future, where you get the idea that society is like right on the verge of collapse, and this really isn't the main focus of the movie. It's more of the backdrop of the movie, and it's really a story about a man coming to the end of his life. And it's not just a great superhero film, but as I said, it's a great drama film as well. And a lot of people are comparing this to The Dark Knight, where The Dark Knight was really a crime drama film that just happened to feature Batman. This is sort of the same thing, where it's really a character drama that just happens to feature the characters from X-Men. Now, I know Disney recently bought 20th Century Fox, but I personally do not want to see the X-Men movies become part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because, for one, I think X-Men works so much better in its own universe, but also, I really like how these current X-Men films are really sort of playing with genre a lot, because you had Deadpool in 2016, which I do count as an X-Men film. You had Deadpool, which was a comedy, you had this, which was a drama film, and the next X-Men film, New Mutants, is going to be a horror film. So I like how this current lineup of X-Men movies is really playing around with genre. Number 13 is All the Money in the World, which, of the two Ridley Scott movies that came out this year, this was easily the better film. Even though I had nothing against Alien Covenant, this was definitely a better film than Alien Covenant. Now, the film is based on the true story of the kidnapping of the grandson of oil tycoon John Paul Getty. And even though the film is based on a true story, the film is a great commentary on how greed can just fucking corrupt a person. Now, I don't know how accurate this movie is to the actual events that it's based on, but in the movie, John Paul Getty Sr. is portrayed as being such a piece of shit. Like, he's willing to spend millions of dollars on pieces of art, but he's not willing to pay the ransom after his grandson is kidnapped, and once again, it's a great commentary on how greed can really corrupt a person's soul. Now, of course, everybody knows the controversy surrounding this movie, that Kevin Spacey originally played John Paul Getty Sr. in this movie, but of course it recently came out that Kevin Spacey is kind of a piece of shit, and basically they reshot those scenes with John Paul Getty, only this time with Christopher Plummer, and the fact that Ridley Scott was able to do that in such a limited amount of time, and the fact that it's generally pretty seamless in the movie, honestly, even though not all of Ridley Scott's films have been masterpieces, the fact that he was able to do that makes him, in my opinion, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And the fact fact that Christopher Plummer was able to give such a good performance in such a limited amount of time also makes him one of the greatest actors to ever walk the face of this planet, and also the editor of this movie must have had a real daunting job, and he also deserves a freaking reward as well. Number 12 is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Now, the film is about this woman whose daughter is brutally murdered, and months go by, and she feels like the police really haven't done shit to try to find her daughter's killer, so she puts up these 3 billboards really calling out the police, and she faces a lot of backlash from the townspeople because of this. And one thing this movie does extremely well is the characters in the movie are very, very three-dimensional. Like Frances McDermott's character in the movie, you do root for her and you do sympathize with her. At the same time, though, she does do some things where you almost understand why the townspeople are so angry with her. And while you understand why she's so angry at the police, you also do sympathize with the police in the movie, especially Woody Harrelson's character in the movie, and even to a certain extent Sam Rockwell's character, who is an asshole in the movie, but that character actually does go through a real arc in this film, and once again, the characters in the movie are extremely three-dimensional. And the movie also touches on a lot of serious issues like race, police brutality, abuse, domestic violence, but the movie's also really funny as well. Number 11 on my list is The Void, which is essentially a tribute to the works of John Carpenter. Like, the film definitely has the feel of stuff like Assault on Precinct 13 and Prince of Darkness, but the film is also very much a tribute to the works of H.P. Lovecraft. In fact, I would say this is probably one of the most Lovecraftian movies I've ever seen that isn't actually based on a story by Lovecraft. Number 10 on my list is Raw, which is a French-Belgium horror drama film that technically I think would count more as a 2016 film because it came out at Cannes Film Festival in 2016, but it didn't get a wide release until 2017, so I'm counting it as a 2017 film, even though it did come out at film festivals in 2016. But Raw is an excellent movie, and it's a film about cannibalism, but oddly enough, the cannibalism is not the most disturbing thing about this movie. Like, this movie manages to take things which shouldn't be disturbing, but actually makes them very disturbing, and also there's a lot of stuff in this movie that's really disgusting, but the movie's so beautifully shot that it's like this perfect marriage between the hideous and the beautiful, and I know that sounds really pretentious, but believe me, it really does work in this movie. It's also a very sexual movie, too, and like, there's a scene in this movie where the main character is like licking this guy's eyeball in a very sexual way, and it's stuff like that which in my opinion is more disturbing than the cannibalism in the movie. Number 9 is War for the Planet of the Apes, which is the 3rd film in this new Planet of the Apes trilogy. And one thing I really like about these new Planet of the Apes movies is they really are rivaling the original series in a lot of ways, because Dawn of the Planet of the Apes in this movie I would rank right up there with the original Planet of the Apes. Now, I did a review of this movie over the summer, and in that review, I believe I did say that I liked Dawn of the Planet of the Apes more, but the more that I think about it, I might actually like this one more. I might actually think this is the best film of the new Planet of the Apes trilogy. And one of the reasons for that is because this is really a human drama. Even though most of the main characters in this movie are not humans, it's still a very human film. And Woody Harrelson gives a great performance in this movie as, in my opinion, a really three-dimensional villain. Number 8 is Good Time, which is a drama/black comedy, and this is a fantastic movie. Basically, it's about this douchebag who, him and his mentally challenged brother try to rob a bank, and something goes horribly wrong, and his brother ends up getting arrested, and basically the film is set over the course of one night of him trying to get enough money to bail his brother out of prison. And it's just fascinating to see this guy dig himself a deeper and deeper hole. And there's stuff in this movie where I'm seriously like, okay, how stupid can you be? At the same time, though, you buy it. Like, I could believe somebody like this exists. Like, I know people like this exist. I went to high school with people like Robert Pattinson's character in this movie, and some of them actually are in prison now. And the movie reminded me of Requiem for a Dream in terms of how it was shot, and also how nihilistic the film is. At the same time, though, there is a lot of humor in this film, but the humor is very, very dark. And a lot of the humor really comes from the fact that you see this really stupid man, once again, dig himself a deeper and deeper hole. And Robert Pattinson, he gets a lot of shit for being in the Twilight movies, but if you actually look at some of his other performances outside of Edward Cullen, he's actually a really damn good actor, and he gives a damn good performance in this movie. Number 7 on my list is Blade Runner 2049, which I might have actually enjoyed more than the original film. Now, I'm not like a diehard fan of the original film. I do like it, but I'm not like in love with it. I'll admit I've only seen the movie once, and I actually saw it right after reading the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which is the book that the first movie is based on, and if you've ever read that book, you would realize that the movie and the book could not be more different from each other, so I'll admit, when I first saw that movie, once again, I only saw it once, I'll admit I was somewhat disappointed because I saw it right after reading the book, but I really should give the original film another chance. And not just is this one of the best sequels of all time, but this is definitely one of the best science fiction films of recent years. And the film is beautifully shot, but there's a lot of deeper themes in the film about classism and even about identity to a certain extent. Now, you do have to see the original film in order to get some of the things that are going on in this movie, but here's the thing though, all the callbacks to the original film in this movie don't feel like fan service, they actually feel like they're serving the story. And it's also a great mystery film as well, and Ryan Gosling gives an amazing performance as this guy who really starts to learn a lot about his own existence, and it's really fascinating to see the arc that this character goes through. And the director of this movie, you'll have to forgive me because I can't for the life of me pronounce this director's name, but he's really proven himself to be a force to be reckoned with in Hollywood, because I'll admit I have not seen all of his movies, but I've seen most of them. Like, I've seen Prisoners, I've seen Enemy, I've seen Sicario, I've seen Arrival, and of course, I've seen this movie, and I think all the films I've seen from him really have been damn near masterpieces. Number 6 is The Disaster Artist, which is about the making of the film The Room. Now, I'll admit I have not seen The Room, but I know it's considered to be one of the worst movies of all time, and this movie really makes me want to see The Room, even though I know it's going to be a bad movie. This film has really got me interested in checking that movie out. And I really did see this film as sort of a love letter to filmmaking. Even though it's about the making of a film that a lot of people consider to be an atrocity to filmmaking, the film in a lot of ways is saying, yeah, if you're going to get into filmmaking, don't do this. And James Franco really gives an amazing performance as Tommy Wiseau, a guy who really has been considered to be a joke for years, and still is kind of considered to be a joke by a lot of people, yet this movie really makes you sympathize with him. At the same time, though, it shows you why everything went wrong with the production of The Room, and a lot of it does fall on Tommy Wiseau and his ego, but you still sympathize with him, and the scene where he sees the audience reaction to his movie is actually really heartbreaking. And it's also a great commentary on friendship and how true friends can look past each other's flaws. Number 5 is My Friend Dahmer, which is probably one of the most haunting films I've seen this year, mainly because you know what this guy would eventually do later in his life, and that's what makes it so haunting. But the film does not portray Jeffrey Dahmer as a complete monster. In fact, the movie sort of implies that had this kid got the help he needed at the time, maybe things would have turned out differently. The issue was nobody was paying attention, and even those who noticed that something was wrong did not know how to properly handle it. But My Friend Dahmer is an amazing and very haunting film. Number 4 on my list is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which of the 3 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that came out this year, I thought this one was easily the best. And honestly, I know a lot of people would disagree with me. I actually kind of liked this better than the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I liked the soundtrack better, and I just thought there was a lot of stuff in this movie. Like, yes, the movie's funny as hell, but there are moments in this movie which are genuinely touching and genuinely heartbreaking. And this movie brings back characters from the first movie who were sort of villains in the first movie, who go through real arcs in this film. And now we're on to my top 3 favorite films of the year. Number 3, It. Now, if you know me, you know I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and I'm a die-hard fan of the book It. Like, the book It, I honestly think is Stephen King's masterpiece, and it's one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. Now, as much as I loved this movie, I'll admit I had some minor nitpicks about it, but that's also because I'm such a die-hard fan of the book. Like, there were some characters in the film I felt like were really underdeveloped, but that's only because there was so much detail about them in the book, and there's only so much you could throw into a 2-hour-something long movie. And honestly, there's so much in the book that you could almost do a 2-season-long TV series based on everything from the book, and for the most part, I think the movie did a pretty good job at truncating a lot of stuff from the book. And the movie also did a great job at staying true to the most important themes of the book. Like, themes like childhood trauma and the loss of innocence are definitely touched on in this film. And very much like the book, it's not just a great horror story, but it's also a great coming-of-age story. Now, the movie definitely ups the humor. Now, there was some humor in the book and some humor in the 1990 miniseries, but this one really, really ups the humor to a point where it's almost just as much a comedy as it is a horror film and a drama film. Now, a lot of people have been calling this The Goonies meets Nightmare on Elm Street, and while it is boiling it down, it's also pretty dead on as well. But I really have to say, whoever the casting director for this movie was, there is a special place in heaven for this person, because even though I do think some of the characters were a little underdeveloped, I think all the actors in this movie, especially the child actors, nailed their roles. Especially the actress who plays Beverly in the movie. In my opinion, she steals this movie from the rest of the cast. And even though I don't necessarily think this movie did justice to the novel, this is still going to go down as one of my personal favorite Stephen King adaptations. And honestly, we needed this after how bad The Dark Tower turned out. Number 2 on my list is Detroit, which is probably scarier than some of the actual horror films that came out this year. In fact, I almost want to call this film a horror film, because it borders on being a horror film. Honestly, this is one of the most disturbing films I've ever seen in my life, but of course it's a very different kind of horror than something like It, because this is real-life horror, especially because it's a true story. Now, I don't know how accurate the film is to the actual events, but even if only half of this is true, that's still freaking horrifying. And Will Porter gives a performance in this movie that damn near made me shit bricks. And honestly, this might actually be the best film of the year. It's not my personal favorite film of the year, but it's probably the best film of the year. Now, while I thought Detroit was the best film of the year, it's not my personal favorite film of the year, and there is a slight difference between what is the best and what is your personal favorite. And while Detroit was a phenomenal movie, it was also downright depressing. So my number one pick is a film that certainly is not a better film than something like Detroit, but this is a film that I just found to be pure, unadulterated fun. And my number one favorite film of 2017 is Kong Skull Island. Once again, a lot of the other movies on this list are probably technically better than this one, but this is the film I had the most fun with. Now, the film is a reboot of the King Kong franchise, but it's set in the same universe as the 2014 reboot of Godzilla, and it's technically a prequel to that movie because this is set in the 1970s, and the 2014 Godzilla film took place in present day. Now, I did like Gareth Edwards' Godzilla film, and if you remember, I actually put that in my video of my favorite films of 2014, but that's a movie that the more I thought about it, the less I liked it, and the less it's really held up for me. I still like the movie, but I think the Gareth Edwards one has a lot of problems. And this movie fixes so many of the problems that the 2014 Godzilla film had, mainly in the characters. The characters in this movie, while they're not the most developed characters in the world, they're still very likable, and they still have personalities to them, unlike the characters from the 2014 Godzilla film, who really had no character to them. This one actually does have, in my opinion, a great sense of character. Once again, the characters are not the most well-developed characters in the world, but they're still likable characters who have personalities. Now, if you know me, you know I grew up with kaiju films, especially Godzilla films, and admittedly, I've always been more of a Godzilla guy than a King Kong guy, but once again, this film was just incredible in my opinion, and this movie really did sort of awaken my inner child. Once again, it's not necessarily the best film of the year. Once again, the other films on this list are probably technically better than this, but this is just my personal favorite. Now, before I end this video, I just want to name off a few honorable mentions. John Wick Chapter 2, the Lego Batman movie, A Cure for Wellness, The Belko Experiment, Free Fire, Wonder Woman, It Comes at Night, Spider-Man Homecoming, Happy Death Day, and Split. So that's it. That's my list of my top 15 favorite films of 2017. Let me know in the comments what some of your favorite films of 2017 were. And my next video is going to be a list of my 4 least favorite films of 2017.